Hello and welcome to Focus on Parliament on Civic Space TV, brought to you by the Center for Constitutional Governance. I am Isaac Kwagala, your host. We begin in Parliament, where the political opposition has unveiled a 55.7 trillion alternative budget amid accusations of political mismanagement and corruption leveled against the government. And also across our country's northern frontier, the world's youngest state, South Sudan, once again is teetering on the brink of total collapse. The renewed surge in violence pitting two old bitter rivals, the country's president, General Salva Kiir, and his first vice president, General Riek Machar. To further complicate issues is the interventionist position of the UPDF, who have intervened in that conflict at the behest of the former. To discuss these significant developments and the implications they could have for our country and the region at large is a panel of distinguished personalities whom I now have the honor and the pleasure to introduce to you, our dear viewers. Let me start introducing them from my immediate left. Is Professor Mwambusa Devesa, who is an eminent historian and a renowned political commentator. Professor, it's a pleasure to have you on the program. Say hello to the viewers.
Thank you, and good morning to the viewers and listeners out there. Glad to be here once again to share with you issues of national and regional importance.
It's a pleasure to have you, Prof. Next to Professor is Mr. Timothy Chemonges, the Executive Director at the Center for Policy Analysis and the Parliament Watch. Doug, it's a pleasure to have you. Say hello to the viewers.
Thank you, Isaac. Good morning to our viewers. Glad to be here. Looking forward to a very fruitful discussion, specifically on matters of accountability and matters to do with regional peace and security. Thank you.
Many thanks indeed. And of course, last but not least is Dr. Tolit Charles Atia, who is a distinguished political economy researcher and the Associate Director at the Center for Constitutional Governance. Dr. Tolit is also a governance and security specialist. Doctor, it's a pleasure to have you today. Say hello to the viewers.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here this morning, and a very good morning to our viewers.
Thank you, Doctor, for joining us. Tim, I want to start with you. Being our eyes and ears in Parliament, the discussion around the alternative budget by the opposition, is this a mere political rhetoric, or it's a feasible policy statement that can aid the country to shore up its economic fortunes? What is it, first and foremost? Help us to break it down.
Thank you, Isaac. So alternative budgets or anything alternative which the opposition usually actually presents, it's just not the budget, but also the alternative statements, the alternative comments or even remarks that the opposition actually provides. So specifically to this, these are largely shadow proposals by the opposition on what they think, on what they envision as if they were in charge, what they would actually do. And usually, of course, the comparison is in the status quo in light of what the government has proposed. And so I think that when you look at the alternative budgets that have been presented recently by the leader of opposition, Joel Senyonyi, I think that it's a very brilliant proposal and report, and some of the things that are highlighted in there. And maybe just to emphasize, I think that alternative reports, alternative proposals by the opposition, they are usually more persuasive and not binding in nature. And that means that the government and other stakeholders, it is at their discretion to really take them up. Many times I think there are quite a number of proposals in the previous years that have been taken up, but again, given the interest and understanding that the budget process and even the budget itself is predominantly a political tool, and that the the government in place seeks to realize its objectives, its interests, and even sometimes the interests of the individuals through this budget. And so much of what the opposition really presents, it's to the extent of hoping the executive will be able to pick them up. And so maybe just to share a couple of highlights really in light
Exactly.
of the alternative budget. This specific budget is premised around the question of the fight against corruption, and the hope is that with the fight of corruption, then you definitely have high chances of service delivery. And it is true, and when you look at the statistics around our standing on matters corruption, they are quite interesting. But I'll just share a bit of a few highlights. I think that the opposition, first of all, their total budget proposal is around 55.7 trillion, vis-a-vis what government has so far proposed of around 71.1 trillion. So that gives you a bit of a difference of around 16 trillion. Now, what I think we also need to understand is that for the last 5 years or so, our budget realization, the realization of our budget has been around 85%. So what that means is that if we passed a budget of around, say, 72 trillion, the most that we can realize in terms of disbursements, in terms of what is actually given to the different votes and those that have been approved, has not exceeded 84.5% of the total budget. Secondly, I think that there are quite a number of areas that the opposition pick out certain key highlights, and among those has been the question of misuse and the misplacement of resources. So one of those has been around the treasury operations. When you look at the proposed budget, it actually it allocates it close to 21.5 trillion. That specific budget line,
that component is aimed towards what?
So for these largely it's run by the treasury really, in terms of, and it's usually for operation. And again, the reason as to why I myself even can't tell you what that money usually is used is because there are no guidelines, there is no framework for which these resources actually should be used. And so what that means is that it presents a leeway for misuse many times, and that if there is no clear way of how that is handled, it's likely to create a bit of gaps. There are issues to do with resource mobilization by government. And again, I think the biggest gap that we've had, I think for the past 5 years, and actually previously, you'll see that the different stakeholders, including Parliament itself, they have fallen short to always only focus on expenditure and put very less attention on revenue. And so you see the different players saying we should give this entity this amount of money, we should give the other this one is the money, and there is very less attention to how this money where are we going to get this money. Now there are a couple of gaps that have been highlighted by the report, and you'll see that the first is around the gold export, which actually is among the leading products that we export, to a tune of around 11.2 trillion in total. Now, we don't get revenues out of that. The actual amount of money that we should be getting from this total export should be around close to 68.8 trillion, for 68.8 billion, which we always forego. And so there is no tax in that area. And there's quite a bit in terms of what is left hanging. Secondly, there's been a lot of concern around debt and the available resource that is available to government to use in development. And so you find that government in the upcoming budget indicates that after paying taxes, after paying all the other obligations that we should, they are left with around 28 trillion that would be available to them for the discretion, building roads, health cares, and all the other service delivery that would be available to the people. But the opposition seem to think that it is actually not, it's not true. Their concern is that the executive has continued to include expenditures such as those of wages, salaries, and like, for example, wages in the upcoming budget should be around 7.4 trillion. You have pension going to around 2.1 trillion. So there is a huge amount of money that goes into wages, pension, gratuity, and all the other monies that end up eating on what is available to development. And so what that means is that after paying all the other, you have very limited amount of money that is available for the discretion and for development. There's also the bigger monster around now, corruption, where corruption has actually over the years metamorphosized in a very interesting way, that these days corruption is in the budget itself. It's well planned, it's well budgeted for, and there is a very clear way of it being executed. And the opposition really referred to the Auditor General's report of 2022, where the Auditor General highlighted that we lose close to around 9.5 trillion in corruption, which would actually indicate, which when you quantify it, it's close to a half of what is available for government to put into development. And that's what the discretionary budget really, the available discretionary budget, the 10 trillion, not of the total amount of money. So that's quite some significant amount of money. The other thing that caught my attention was the fact that the opposition seemed to agree with the government in terms of what can be collected locally. So government projects that in the next financial year, up to that 5 trillion of the 71 trillion would be collected domestically. Of course, in the recent past, there has been a bit of shortfall, not significant, but we've seen a bit of an increase in terms of amounts of money that are collected locally. But they both agree in light of that. And so maybe as I conclude really, is to also say that this specific alternative budget report by the opposition is premised on a number of programs really. There are programs and some of the alternative perspective for which the opposition have. And starting with that is around public sector transformation. On the perspective that we spend a lot of money on public administration. Actually, a lot of money, and if you look at the statistics, close to 7.5 trillion goes towards wages and paying people salaries, which again compromises service delivery. And when we say 7.5, is the 7.5 should be juxtaposed with the available money that goes towards towards development, which again, while government puts it at around 28 trillion in the next financial year, when you reduce wages, pensions, gratuity, and all the other money, which could amount to around 10 trillion, you find that you are having almost only 18 trillion towards development. And so there's a fundamental problem around that the opposition highlight on the need for us to reduce the cost of public administration, including reducing the number of members of parliament, the number of ministers, the number of some of the civil servants that we have, and really seeing how that area can be managed. The other is around governance and security as a program, which speaks to the question of corruption and the need to curtail that area and provide a proper mechanism for which we use our resources better. There's also emphasis around the thematic area of agro-industrialization, on the need to ensure that there's value addition, there's question of market identification, but also proper support to the farmers, so that then there's there is proper production in that area. The other programs such as the human capital development, there are programs such as sustainable energy development, where I think when you look at the report, it's not any new. Most of these things have continued to be emphasized in the previous years, and government has most of this. And so when you look at the report by the opposition, you see that it reiterates most of the things that have actually been put in place by the different entities, including the Auditor General, who has actually put it very clear in terms of how we are using resources, how we are prioritizing different components within our framework, but also more importantly, in terms of ensuring that there's a very clear accountability of how resources are used, how resources are disbursed, and really how the ultimate citizen gets to benefit from this process.
Thank you, Timothy, for that exposition. But before we take leave of the aspect of the major highlights of the opposition's alternative budget, what are they proposing on reinforcing the key accountability mechanisms to ensure accountability for taxpayers' money?
Yeah. So when you look at the report, there are a couple of they've been segmented in different areas, and the first is around ensuring that institutions are independent to be able to deliver their mandate, and the concern has been around institutions such as the police, institutions such as Parliament. Even upon coming with key recommendations, most of those actually are not actualized. The police is also, has been a victim of this whole issue. There's also a proposal around ensuring that there is clarity and transparency in how resources are used. Now, in how that is done, I think it's a function of operation, but there is emphasis around the need to ensure that transparency in how resources, but also implementation of many of these recommendations that are provided for in most of these reports. And so I think that at the core of this, at the core of the opposition's perspective, lies the question of governance and how we prioritize, how we manage, and how we ensure that there is clear accountability in the resources. Yeah.
Doctor, Timothy has set for us the baseline standard for the discussion. Let us now revert back to the major focus of the opposition in terms of the accusations it has leveled against the government, one being economic mismanagement, the other being corruption. And we see a significant disparity between the budgetary proposal of the opposition and the one by the government. One is at a tune of 55.7 trillion, whereas for the government it is 71 trillion. What do you read into that?
Yeah, thank you very much, Isaac. Listening to Timothy, you get into you get into this kind of what do they call it? It's an inoculation. You feel that the body begins to feel as if there is some substance that is being pushed into it, and it begins to tend to feel comfortable, and probably that is the kind of singular message that comes out of this particular act of the leader of the opposition. But suffice to say that as Timothy again put it, this is not anything extraordinary. There is nothing, extraordinary about it. This is expected. This is routine. This is what ought to be done. The question here then is to what effect or to what end? And for me, that's where my challenge is. I do not think we should even spend a lot of time dwelling on you know, the, the framework issues. And not that they are not important. They are, because, for instance, to be able to digest a budget, to tease out what the intention of a particular budget is, because budgets come with specific objectives at a given time. And then there are also strategies, and there are mechanisms, and there are both the issues and then the mechanisms suggested. Like he's pointed out, the key, if you looked at this budget, one of the things you'd ask yourself, 71 trillion, yes, but 71 trillion, what does it address? You know, does it speak to the popular mass? For instance, if you went and singled out agriculture and say agribusiness and processing, just like Timothy was trying to single out for us the program areas. If you went and singled out defense, security, you single out, say, education, health, then you have these thematic areas or program areas, and then you sort of cast, you cast it against a wide ledger of what our actual problems are, you know. So it would help if, say, you went to agrobusiness and asked yourself, in, say, the last review, because this, we know that budgetaries are basically their functions, you know, of government programs. So, and we've had budgets back to back. So one way to look at it is that maybe in the last 5 years or so, or even 10, in a particular direction, what kind of progression are we making? Because remember, you also need to look at this budget and read it as whole, with also what you'd look at as the proposed government physical policy issues or framework, both in the immediate, in the medium, and in the long term. Now, for us, our fiscal policy management strategies are now within the National Development Plan. So, and we keep giving target years, you know. So you can only, these figures can only make sense if you are able to deduce or deduct within these three hopping, what are the wishes of the people, or what, okay, they are the wishes, but they also, what are the pressing issues? For instance, there is this collective agreement that both individual and collective agreement and thinking or feeling or sense of feeling around the country that service delivery has been buckled up. The ordinary person does not seem to see, and it is evident. For instance, look at how much time you take to get to work in Kampala. Look at the safety issues. We have been forced to, because of time, we're trying to beat time or find flexibility in time, we have been forced to jump on the border. Which border we know is basically, you know, open danger to person. If you went to, okay, in fact, let me put it this way. We have borders to try and avert the issue of time or flexibility within, you know, the difficulty, congestion and jam. And we've gone ahead and imported many, and the youth, it has given the youth a quick relief. But in tandem, if you went to Mulago Hospital or any of these hospitals and went to the wards, the injury wards, and you see the number of people with their legs hanging, you know, in all sorts of directions, and many of these are government facilities. So there's also expenditure. So the kind of point I'm trying to deduct is that when you set off for a budget, you know, Timothy made an interesting point towards his wrap up. He was saying one of the key issues raised of that budget is public administration. You know, the cost of public administration. And so it is important to keep teasing out where the areas of obnoxious expenditure are, you know, for you to say you have a budget that resonates to both interests, actual demands, and all that. So first of all, we know that we have a budget, like for instance in the area of health, we have a budget we have never met what international principles have demanded for as a basic threshold. You know, we've always, like in health, there is the Abuja Declaration, which I think calls 15%. For 15%. At where are we now?
6.2%.
6.2%.
There is also another one for agriculture.
The Maputo Protocol.
Takes it at 10%.
Yes. So there are all these. So there's this thing, and I've always said it, that with globalization, you know, with the notion of globalization today, for you to be able to ratify your dealings within your territory, you need to cast an eye out, because, like for instance, this budget, Timothy says we only realize about 85%. And in terms of revenue, local revenue generated, we only raise about 37%. The translation is that the rest of the money is either borrowed or it is donations.
Yeah.
Now, when you start talking about borrowing in a period, in a time where a country has almost reached the brink of its seal to borrow, then you know that is a budget that is limping. So for me, the question, or to come back to your question directly, it's no longer an issue of how much, because even that 71, how did they realize it? Do they factor in all these principles? Because what is the attitude of the political bureau? Are they paying attention to some? Because in as long as, I saw a study, I think by IMF, which was saying our budget cannot be functional. We cannot move, we cannot realize what they look at as economic development. We cannot begin to see economic development until we inject a certain amount of money in our budget. So for me, 71 trillion against 55. If you factor in the actual needs, you factor in the issues of standards, you factor in the experience of the ordinary person, you know, in terms of public service, service delivery. So in as long as in Kampala we are still spending 5 hours in a jam, then I don't see a budget which is working.
Doctor, in a minute, before you wrap up, do you think this could be a function of corruption, the disparity?
Well, I normally stay away from using the word corruption, because I also think that in terms of if I prefer to use the word governance, because you see, corruption is not a singular terminology. Because whenever we talk about corruption, what the mind evokes, usually, I think, is what people commonly know as misuse of funds. But it is beyond that. You know, that is why I'm telling you, that's why I'm trying to bring in the issue of attitude. The issue of political attitude, the issue of policy attitudes, the issue of attitude to adherence to governance, and the sense to live within, to develop, first of all, values, national values. Because, for instance, let me give you this example. Look at the graduates we had, particularly both school, both formal school and even out of school, and attitude towards work. If you looked at our budgets in the 60s and 70s and compared them to today, and looked at the attitude of the worker then compared to the one today, you find that the attitude the young people have, and most of them, they make the bigger part of our population today, and we have to admit the attitude to work has its own challenges, and for me that is also corruption. Because if somebody can afford to come to an office at 8, which is the reporting time, and maybe click a button, like we have seen happening in Parliament, you know, with the aim that you are looking at earning, and then you walk away, and only come back again to clock in, to close.
To clock out.
Yeah? You know? The other time we had a similar discussion here. I was telling you that, for instance, the ability of processing, say, bills at committee stage in Parliament, you find there are bills, there are bills that have stayed in that Parliament for over 10 years, 5 years, 6 years. These are instruments, these are policy instruments that are supposed to help to go to alleviate the challenges people have in their day-to-day life. So for me, it is beyond figures. I mean, as long as we are going to discuss the budget and narrow it just to so high, so low, because there are a few subterranean issues. Like, for instance, there is a lot of money, and I would have loved to see that in this report. There is a lot of money that we have borrowed. It is drawing interests, and we are not spending it just because of issues of bureaucracy and probably the kind of corruption you're talking about. You know, that in itself is a challenge. So for me, the budget should be scrutinized in a much more broader way, and it should take more of a political economy lens, if you like, so that you are able to examine issues you need to examine issues of governance, including interrogating policies. Tim made an interesting point. Parliament, for instance, now is more keen about the allotment of funds. Okay? But they are not looking at how revenue is generated. And there are some policies that hinder. For instance, you look at, if you examine I spent time trying to look at the issue of tax holidays, and across the world, Uganda and across the world, and how it is progressing. Almost everybody has run away from tax holidays because it is just a sheer scam, you know. If you look at our economic outlook right now, our productive economic outlook, we are not in charge of it. And once you have an economy which is not in the hand of indigenous people, particularly where we are internationally living in economies tagged to the dollar, it becomes a problem, you know. We can hardly save $1. For every dollar we get, we spend 3/4 of it, either in form of paying debt or it is being repatriated. So it is really an orthodox, it is a kind of an orthodox budgetary system that we are running, which hardly speaks to the ordinary people.
Thank you, Doctor, for your thoughts. Professor, the leader of the opposition paints a very bleak picture of our country's economic landscape. Can this be redeemed in light of the fact that we have a lot of wasteful expenditure? For example, at the moment, we are funding the war in Sudan by terming it as an intervention of the Ugandan security forces to stabilize that country. Is it sustainable?
Thank you, but let me also give my general overview of a budget from the opposition. Last night I heard on TV the minister in charge of information, Dr. Barjomunsi, dismissing, I think even arrogantly, dismissing the issue of alternative budget, that it is inconsequential after all. What is it for? It's a waste of time. In other words, that's what you are saying. But I want to say that that is not really true. That's a waste of time, because that's why there is opposition. That's why we have the multi-party system. And the budget, let's begin to unpack what the budget is all about. The budget sometimes is conventionally understood to mean estimated revenue and estimated expenditure, but I think it is much more than that. The budget is also talking about systems. It is also talking about policies. It is also talking about paradigms. And so the budget alternative is, one, auditing the government, but also presenting a picture of the alternative budget, and in all ways beyond revenue and expenditure, in respect of policies, in respect of paradigms, so that we can see whether the alternative, the opposition has actual alternative ideas. And so, the alternative budget, if I were to ask those who made it, where did they base it? Or where should the government, even itself in power, base its budget? There must be something that informs the budget. One, it should be informed by, as colleagues have talked about it, informed by the Auditor General. Because the Auditor General can give us a feel of how the other budget was used and what went wrong and how it can be corrected. It should be aligned to the National Planning Authority, because the National Planning Authority has already made a plan and it should be reflected in the budget. So I hope the opposition also looked at the National Planning Authority. It should also be based on UBOS, Uganda Bureau of Statistics, because they carry out research in this country, like say poverty, multidimensional poverty research. It should also be based on other institutions like Uganda Equal Opportunities Commission, because a budget should reflect the paradigm of the regime in power, or in this case, the regime in the waiting. When you are budgeting, you should not also be merely technocratic and economistic, because the budget is not about solve problems only of the economy or only of governance as such. The budget, the alternative budget should give us the paradigm of that opposition in respect of nation building. I normally hint on nation building. This nation, unless we have national identity, all these things will come to naught, one time or the other, and they are not sustainable. So when you go to the Equal Opportunities Commission and the Uganda Bureau of Statistics, and they show you the poverty levels in this country in terms of disparity, that in some places, especially the north and northeast, there are 60% level of multidimensional poverty, whereas like say, central and western, The average is even less than 15. Yeah? So how does a budget try to correct this disparity in the country? Because if we don't correct inequality, you are not building a country, you are not building a nation, and it will be torn apart. So the budget should look at that one in terms of the paradigm. If I go to the paradigm of development, today, world over, we are living in a knowledge economy. In fact, you look at the richest people in the world today, they are in high tech. The richest are almost all in high tech. Where is Uganda now? The alternative budget should show us, for example, how to spend and prioritize policies to do with the digital divide. Digital acquisition even first, but also digital divide in Uganda. Which regions do have internet access? Which ones don't have? Which schools have computers? And how can we budget for the computer so that we have internet access and acquisition of skills, this time digital skills in this country? Because that rhymes with the paradigm development of Uganda. You know, when the president came up, I think it was basically the president, actually, it was not government. This issue of policy shift of paying science teachers hefty salaries, I would have expected the opposition maybe to say, no, for us, developing science is about laboratories, is about laboratory equipment, is about internet access, is about computers in those schools, and also differentially, so that you cater for the rural areas where the majority or even of Ugandans live, so that we do have parity between rural area access to technology and urban centers. Something like a paradigm shift along those lines. So that when we are dealing with the economy and when we are dealing with the budget, we are looking at systems, auditing systems, and therefore giving an alternative auditing systems. We are looking at funds allocation in terms of maybe equality in this country, maybe in terms of nation building, maybe in terms of prioritizing certain development sectors, like I've pointed out, in terms of the digital economy. Digital skills, digital economy, and you could even give alternatives to issues to do with the environment. Let me come to revenue now. Colleagues have already pointed out areas to tax, but the opposition should also have task government. By the way, the budget process is also a policy process, and that's why there are ministerial policy statements required and putting to task government about revenue, for example. The opposition, I haven't read that one. They should have tasked government. You know, I have said this before, I will say it here again. In terms of the traditional East African community countries, Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, and Rwanda. Forget about the other basket cases of Burundi and the DRC and Somalia now. Uganda Revenue Authority is the worst performer in terms of revenue collection in relation to GDP in East Africa. I repeat this one. Uganda Revenue Authority is the worst performer. Now, in that performance, I'm not talking about the Uganda Revenue Authority as an institution per se, in terms of revenue collection management. I'm talking about the funds they collect, the revenue they collect, vis-a-vis the ratio to GDP. Why is that so? And what has the opposition told us about? But as members said, GDP is contributed to by export of minerals, but we don't tax them, almost. There is a question of also taxing certain sectors like agriculture. I have always said that agriculture should be taxed. They say people are poor. No, you put up a threshold. Say, you can say anybody with 10 Frisian cows and below should not be taxed. But how come somebody with 100 Frisian cows doesn't pay tax, and we pay tax? We who a primary teacher who earns 400,000, 500,000 as salary pays tax, but somebody with 100 cows, Frisians at that, doesn't pay. You know, what is that? Somebody has a banana plantation and can sell 2 rodefuls of matoke every month, 2, and he is not taxed. Somebody has got 50 acres of rice grown somewhere in northern Uganda or eastern Uganda and does not pay tax. You know, agriculture contributes about 22% to GDP. Most people don't know. They think agriculture contributes 70 or 60. No, it contributes only 22% to 23%. Nevertheless,
although it employs the most.
It employs the most. But the point I wanted to make is that in terms of contribution of agriculture to Uganda Revenue Authority correction,
Yes.
it is less than 2%. Can you imagine a sector that contributes 22% to GDP, but contributes only to less than 2% to tax correction? So there is a need to scrutinize the performance of the economy vis-a-vis the paradigms. You know, I think this was a test to the opposition alternative budget, to test for us, to test its paradigm of development, paradigm of governance, paradigm of social development, but also to see how they have audited the systems of government. To me, auditing is not about auditing how the money was received and is expended, but also auditing the paradigms as well as the policies of the government in power or the government in the waiting.
Thank you, Professor, for your reflections. Focus on Parliament now takes a short break. Do stay with us. We'll see you back shortly.
Digital rights are those human rights and legal rights that allow individuals to access, use, create and publish digital media or to access and use computers, other electronic devices and telecommunication networks. Digital rights include a right to freedom of expression, information and communication through technology, a right to privacy and data protection, a right to credit for personal works, a right to universal and equal digital access, a right to identity, a right to anonymity, a right to be forgotten, and a right for protection of minors, among others. The state's digital rights are frequently violated through various unfair actions, for example, blockage of websites and social networks, theft of credentials, unauthorized use of people's data for personal gain, privacy intrusion, online censorship, arrests and intimidation of online users, internet blockages, and the proliferation of laws and regulations that undermine the potential of technology to drive social, economic, and political development worldwide. It is hence every citizen's responsibility to respect rights of other digital users and to speak out or report to the responsible parties when one's rights are violated.
Welcome back. Glad you're still tuned in to Focus on Parliament on Civic Space TV. In this segment, we discuss the intractable military and political conflict in South Sudan, pitting 2 old bitter rivals, the country's president, General Salva Kiir, and his first vice president, Dr. General Riek Machar. Let me start with Dr. Tolit to bring us to speed with the recent and latest developments in that country. Doctor, early this week we saw President Ruto dispatch a special envoy to South Sudan, the Right Honorable Raila Odinga, who had audience with that country's president, Salva Kiir, but was denied audience with the political rival, Dr. Riek Machar, who is still under house arrest by the regime. He made the return trip and made a stopover in Entebbe, where he had discussions with President Museveni and reported to him on the latest developments in that country. But there is an interesting aspect in the conversation regarding the fact that there is a conflicting report which seems to suggest that he was told by the regime in South Sudan to first seek the approval of President Museveni to interact with Dr. Riek Machar. Is there a pathway to peace in South Sudan, given all these complexities?
Well, thanks for that. And you see, the issue of Sudan is both a complex, but also a very straightforward issue that that sort of reflects, you know, the very hegemonic tendency that regimes that have lived for a long time begin to peak. I want to say that contextually, in terms of security and peace, is this region, either whether it is East Africa or East Africa and the Horn, do we have a security architecture that can actually evoke peace, hold peace, or support peace in the region? I want to say no. We have a very weak peace architecture. There are many factors to that, but one of the most silent facts is that it is arising from the issue of poor governance. And I will give you two examples, and starting with actually the event of Ruto dispatching Raila Odinga. You see, presidents have executive powers, and that is why in any state it's very important that the framework and elements of rule of law are stuck to. And the simple reason is that government is so powerful to be left to act alone, or otherwise, oftentimes, it's going to act very selfish, and the person who actually suffers are the weak. Or alternatively said, government are actually for the weak. Governments are never for the powerful. Otherwise, there would be no need for government. So when you see an incident like the voyage, or you know, of Odinga, one, if you look at what has been developed as the governing framework to support the challenges of Southern Sudan arising from the conflict and then the violence of 2013, and then you have this peace accord, which is now, the name is long, but in a short form it is referred to as the revitalized peace agreement of 2018. It has three key pillars and about also three kind of governance vehicles around it. First of all, that peace was brokered by IGAD, and IGAD still stands as the principal broker. In the same context, there were international guarantors that were placed. They are commonly referred to as the Troika. The Troika is the United States of America, is the United Kingdom, and then the government of Norway. Then there is also a regional guarantor, the regional guaranteeing peace support system. And these include, Kenya is part of it, but it is Ethiopia, it is Rwanda, it's Nigeria. And Uganda is not part of it, it's not mentioned in that particular, and for reasons. And then at the AU level, there's what they call the high advisory council. So, what is interesting with the recent events is that you don't hear the mention of any of these people I have just enumerated. What happens that once the skirmishes started in Juba, we had Uganda moved and deployed. Now we hear Ruto sending an envoy. It would have been interesting to say Ruto having conferenced with their counterparts, that is the region of Nigeria, Rwanda, Rwanda, South Africa, AU.
Isn't he acting under the auspices of IGAD?
We cannot imagine. It is not stated. Have you read anywhere that he was acting under the media reports we read? They said he dispatched. He's not even the chairman. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make
is currently Kenya the chair of
the
IGAD?
Not IGAD.
So who is chair of IGAD?
The chair of IGAD is
the Prime Minister of Ethiopia.
I think could be Ethiopia. Yeah. It's not, but Kenya is the chair of the East Africa community now. So, well, whether he's acting as East Africa community, whether he actually consulted, we also now know that there is a fashion to first do, then consult. But what is interesting in all this is that in terms of the efforts and the framework to bring peace to Southern Sudan, we seem to see people or states trying to act unilaterally. That is one. And then two, the communication between the actors and the would-be recipients. Because Odinga moves, he said the media says he came and stopped in Entebbe to seek permission. Immediately after, yesterday there was another statement by the Minister for Information of Southern Sudan, who is saying what Odinga is saying is false. There's no truth in it. And now, for a peace envoy, because in any matter of peace building, the key principles are two. One, facts. Two, trust. Now, if trust is already being shut down, and your question is, do we see peace coming? I think there is a chance for peace in Southern Sudan, but only in as long as the issues are addressed in an organized, synchronized, and protocol is respected. Because in all this, where is the AU? You know, even the Uganda government that moved its forces in Southern Sudan, when they came to parliament, in their explanation, I didn't see any reference to AU. I've not seen any reference to the Troika. I have not. So, if you're going to have these unilateral actions, hegemonic actions by states, then you begin to ask yourself, are they helping the situation? Or they're even complicating it or even making it worse? The government of Ethiopia already came out and said it's not comfortable with the government of Uganda deploying troops in Southern Sudan. They really think it is not helping the peace process. So that means that there is a discontentment between these heads of state. That means the actions are not unified. So for me, this only portends more chaos, delays the process of seeking immediate harmony. And we know, for instance, that also our movement, say for instance, into Sudan, is we have moved to the support of one party. There has been debate whether there is actually an agreement or there is not. I want to tell you from a technical perspective that there is no agreement. Why? The defense cooperation agreement we had we had it with the government before 2018. The government now is a government, you would call it, it's an expanded government. It's a government, what do they call it? A government of
National unity.
national unity. That is why, for instance, there are 5 vice presidents. That agreement actually brings in Riek Machar as a principal. In the agreement, it actually states that he is returning to Southern Sudan to help with the peace efforts. And is returning as first vice president. And there are a number of concessions that were given to him or the SPLA in opposition, including allocation to ministries, including some governance issues. For example, the transitional parliament, you know. So and the media reports and recent research, especially from security and peace building, shows that Salva Kiir has flouted so many of these things. What actually leads to the current escalations is that I think they arrested about 3 ministers, serving ministers of SPLA in opposition. Actually, 1 has gone missing, is a person missing. And this is not, and this is just, this is what triggered it. In the past, there have been arrests and abductions in the peace process. There is after the agreement, they set out a program of negotiation, peace negotiation, and it has been happening. It has been happening in Nairobi. It is called the Tumaini Accord. Now that process has also been interrupted. One, the SPLA in opposition abandoned it, arguing that, or accusing Salva Kiir for conniving with President Ruto for disruptions. I think they have a list of up to 16 or 17 missing persons, including key principal negotiators, 2 of whom, one is a human rights lawyer who was picked up in 2019
in Nairobi.
In Nairobi, and probably even believed dead now. John Mario Igul, up to today, has not been found. Another one is believed incarcerated. There is a notorious kind of safe house where the national intelligence sits in Juba. And this is where they pick and deposit people. So there are issues of human rights that have tampered with this agreement. Then the other is also the issue of the failure to progress in terms of having a unified army. And also part of the things that brought this challenge is that a section of the army was trained a little while back for, and then they agreed to that group for insertion, reintegration and insertion into the national force. But what Salva Kiir did is that I think they trained about 3,000 something. That entire force, he took it as the Presidential Protection Unit. So Riek Machar, in his own words, says he has been under house arrest since he came back. The 2 parties who should be meeting and talking and bringing confidence to this peace process are not even meeting, have not even met. So the chance for peace in Southern Sudan is not one that is going to come from the kind of peace enforcement that we are trying to project. It only has a chance if they can go back to the arrangements of 2018.
Thank you, Doctor, for your thoughts. Professor, Doctor stresses a very important point touching on the role of the African Union, which I want you to build on and reflect. The issue of the African Union being an interventionist body in resolving conflicts, military and political, on the continent has been brought into sharper focus by this conflict. As of yesterday, a report came out that they had impaneled a committee, a special committee, to go in South Sudan and consult with all the principal parties to that conflict and report back with the view of brokering a mediated political settlement. What are the chances of that succeeding? Firstly, is this a political conflict or it's a military one?
They both feed into each other, the political and the military. They do overlap, and they need to be disentangled by those peace negotiators. In fact, let me this time drum up for the intellectual input into such a peace processes, which has not been prioritized. And they are missing out a lot. I wish they could consult the intellectual side input, like this gentleman here who is an expert in those conflict issues. And I want to give a background or a reference and illustration in the past. When South Africa was failing to go into independence because of the disagreement between ANC and Inkatha Freedom Party, they had reached a stalemate actually. There was intervention by the UN, under the UN intervention auspices, and Professor Washington Okomo, a Kenyan, is the one who broke the ice. I remember he even gave the example of Buganda in Uganda. He told Inkatha Freedom Party and the Zulu that if you don't compromise and accept to move along with the rest, you will be like Buganda. When it refused to move with the rest of Uganda and lost out being at the center of the independence movement process in Uganda. But the Zulu Inkatha movement actually accepted his advice and South Africa attained independence. Now, going to AU. And I wonder what paradigm, going back to my concept of paradigm, what security paradigm the AU fronts in these negotiations. You see, what is needed, in my opinion, in Sudan is not a military security paradigm, the one of Museveni and Uganda. It is not. A military security paradigm where you are going to solve the problems militarily will not work, because the problems of Sudan are largely not military. They are problems of conflicts. The source of conflict is ethnic in Sudan and poor governance. And therefore AU, when it comes to Sudan to mediate and broker the peace, they should create an incentive, especially for Salva Kiir, to negotiate, to have a political settlement rather than a military strategy. The military strategy will not work. I don't see Salva Kiir having a military dominance over Machar. He would not.
But Prof, in terms of the incentive, Dr. Toret referenced the 2018 revitalized agreement, which had a number of provisions that had incentivized both parties, and they had agreed it is Salva Kiir who has fundamentally violated the key terms of that agreement, thus the current conflict. Isn't that a contradiction in terms?
No, the incentives I'm talking about, for example, Uganda has spoiled the incentives. You go and tell Salva Kiir that you either accept to go on the negotiation table or we leave you and the forces of Machel will come to Juba and you'll fight it out in Juba. You see, when you continue propping him up, giving him arms, giving him maybe financial support, giving him diplomatic support, he will not have incentives to come to the negotiating table. The same incentives should go to Machel. You tell him that you also, if you don't do it, next time, by the way, you are pushed out of Juba or you are imprisoned, we shall let you be on your own and you'll be killed. Because Kiri has the capacity to kill him there. And therefore, we should not pamper them, these two forces, and they should not hold Sudan at ransom. They should be told in no uncertain terms. They should actually be moved away from Khartoum, from Juba. Be brought maybe to Arusha at the East African community or IGAD. I think the IGAD chairman, by the way, we are confused. I think it might be the Djibouti, Djibouti president.
Djibouti, yeah.
Yeah, you take them to Djibouti and tell them, these are the heads of state, and AU comes in, UN comes in, USA come in and say, you people, if you don't resolve the problem peacefully, if you don't have good governance put in place, equality, because justice and all these things, you don't do it, we shall, first of all, put embargo on you as individuals and as the country, and you will suffer. They could even stop their exports if need be from exporting. But you see, they are vested interests by the regional players, mainly Uganda and Kenya. They are opportunistic. For them, they are taking advantage of Sudan, almost being in this chaos, you know, supporting Salva Kiir because we want to trade with him. But that trade is not sustainable in the first instance. Secondly, at the expense of the humanitarian needs, security situation of Sudanese. So why not create an incentive by, if need, blackmailing Salva Kiir and Machel to stop that nonsense? Or if need be, there can be a delegation of heads of state either going there or calling those two principal players in Kampala or Arusha or Dar es Salaam or Nairobi or Djibouti and tell them off that if they do not behave next time, we are going to actually encircle you. We can boycott you in all ways. We can close our roads. If Uganda and Kenya stopped their trade going to Juba, the Juba administration will collapse within no time. So you get what I mean by incentives. And so that we have a negotiated political settlement based on non-military security strategies that should go to good governance, including equality of all players, including integration of the different groups, including constitutional provisions and following the constitution, and asking Salva Kiir to organize an election now or you boycott him in the region.
Professor, for
he becomes a pariah. Why would Salva Kiir be the chairman of East African community when he's so confused there in Sudan? What input was he going to bring in East African integration when he's there not integrating even two tribes? You just give him the chairmanship of East African community. We are not serious in Africa.
Timothy,
Yeah.
Professor seems to paint a very grim picture, but I want us to interrogate the interventionist role of Uganda in the conflict in South Sudan, our neighbor in the north. How does this augur out? Because at the same time, we are members of IGAD, we are members of the East African community, but we do not seem to be sincere.
And the AU.
Actors and the AU, we do not seem to be sincere actors in the mediation effort, because the UPDF has outwardly and openly taken a side to back the president, Salva Kiir, to stay in power. the Right Honorable Raila Odinga, the special envoy of President Ruto, reported that he was asked to actually have an interface with President Museveni in order to have audience with the other key protagonists in the conflict. How does this play out? Is there really a path to peace in the context of Uganda being an actor into the conflict?
Thank you, Isaac. I think that Prof and Dr. Charles have in a way weighed in already on that and given a bit of an optimism picture that I think there is still room for peace. I've had a chance to read a book by a gentleman called John Perkins, Confessions of an Economic Hitman. When he was a former IMF and the World Bank staff, and in that book he tries to share what strategies they used to put in place in order to take advantage of of some of the third world countries, especially those that are in conflicts, those that have resources, and how do you take advantage of them by bombarding them with resources, especially debt, to cripple them while they're enjoying that. So I think that for most of these conflicts, there is usually a beneficiary on the other side. There are people who would always want for the status quo to maintain, partly because of the interests and the benefits that they are likely to realize from this. It's definitely true to say that the conflict in South Sudan, the conflict in Sudan, the conflict in DRC Congo cannot find a solution through the use of war.
Military strategies.
Military strategy, as said. I think that there has to be a mechanism for which people have to sit down and have it resolved. The unfortunate bit here is that we are finding that we have very uncoordinated approaches to this. Everyone seems to be pulling strategies from different areas. I actually saw European Union yesterday issued a report, issued a statement indicating that they are willing to mediate. So you have EU, you have Kenya, you have Uganda trying to intervene in its own way. You have IGAD equally. You have AU, which also partly is here or not there.
The Troika.
And all those parties. So the interventions are quite divided and are not coordinated. And with that, you are likely to see that there is likely to be no clear intervention or solution out of the uncoordinated approaches. I think that ultimately, looking at the bodies that we've given some of the powers and to coordinate us as Africa, you have AU, you have IGAD. I think that there has to be a way in which they spearhead this discussion. We've had in the recent days where there is a fundamental breakdown of trust within the region here, where you've seen, I saw for Congo, I saw Tshisekedi and Kagame in Dubai, Qatar, somewhere in Qatar. After the East African leaders had attempted to bring them together with no success, they refused. We finally see them somewhere in Qatar. Again, partly highlighting the point.
The other time I say that there's no longer a big boy in East Africa.
Hegemony.
Nobody wants to accept.
Yeah, so I think that the question of having a big boy in that sense within the region has been greatly affected by the interests or the interest that most of these would-be big boys in the region have in most of this conflict. Because you see, you have Museveni here in Uganda, who actually by factor of experience and his positioning and much of the work that he has able to do, would be among those that a sort of a fallback plan. But you see, he's the one issuing, is the one providing interventions in military, and which may be in good faith, but perceived compromises the trust and the goodwill that would be provided in that specific country. And so, Isaac, I think that for South Sudan, while it's true that there is hope for peace to exist in the coming days, I agree with Prof that the continued handling of the leaders Riek Machar and Salva Kiir with soft gloves
Should change.
continues to give them an opportunity to, you know, to exercise whatever they are doing. Because you see, you will see that from Salva Kiir, he accuses actually Riek Machar to be facilitating some sort of militia, the white
Army.
the white army, and so there are some other groups, which he actually says I'm not associated with them. On the other side, Kiir is actually floating, or is failing to actually adhere to some of the agreements that already been established.
But he himself, Salva Kiir, is not leading a national army. He is leading also a militia of the Dinka.
Actually, what is, you know, the interesting paradox was in that program to integrate the army into one, something interesting happened. The Salva Kiir, who is in power, arguably, or the SPLA in government, came up with a total number of 109,000 soldiers for integration. Riek Machar came up with a figure of 240,000.
200.
240,000.
Who would pay those?
Yes. Then, of course, there are the other militia groups. So, two issues here come up. One is that the Mariband group actually has a bigger force. So, politically, what does it project? So, Salva Kiir Salva Kiir and his group were the first to shoot it down. They're like, no, this is exaggerated.
Sure.
You cannot have, and they disallowed a number of them. So there is a lot of politics on who is being absorbed into the National Army and who is kept away. And that is a very, very, very sticking point.
And doctor, those are even tribal armies or
course.
tribal militia. And Sudan, some people may think it is the Nuer and the Dinka. No, there are very many other tribes. These ones, like the whole of Equatorial region, Western Equatorial, Eastern Equatorial, and now Juba or Central Equatorial. Those are not Dinka. Those are not Nuer.
No,
These come the Nuer and the Dinka, I think, come from Jonglei and Upper Nile.
Upper Nile, actually.
You have got even the Bantu. People don't know that they are Bantu in Sudan. They are Azande.
Yes.
These ones of Rumbuye. Is it
In Western Equatorial.
in Western Equatorial? Why has Southern Sudan been just these two tribes and two leaders? No, that one must be broken.
Yes,
Yeah.
Timas. Yes,
No,
Sama.
I think that really the point has been made to emphasize the need for a bit of a firm handling of this matter. Otherwise, it becomes a cycle of we make 2 steps ahead and 5 backwards.
Thank you, Timothy, for your comments. Doctor, as we close, you consider your closing remarks, but I want you to touch on a specific aspect. Again, sticking with Uganda's interventionist role in the conflict. The CDF and First Son came out and made very incendiary remarks on his social media platform by saying that the only president that is recognized is Salva Kiir. But also Uganda has been accused of using chemical weapons against the White Army, which could have us, begin to contend with issues in the International Criminal Court or the International Court of Justice. What are the implications of that?
Yeah, you see, for me, what bothers me in this country, and particularly even the citizens, we have a very low level of civicness, so to speak. A friend of mine, an old judge, uses an interesting word. He says Ugandans are indolent. We are very indolent kind of people. Another friend of mine cracks a joke and says anything can happen in Uganda, and Uganda is just a happy place. What you need to do, you can even go, me to lead, or you, Isaac, can go on Kampala Road and walk naked, and it will hit the headlines just for a bit, and she argues that anything that happens here lasts for 3 weeks, 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 days, 3 hours, and it is gone. I don't know how she came to that, but you see, the issues you're raising are very serious. I don't even want to go back to discuss this Twitter thing. It has come, it is now staying with us like a jigger. I cannot explain the head, I cannot explain the tail. The only thing I can explain is that we have an indolent community. Anything can happen here, and nobody has a trace. You know, we have simply given up our agency. Because, you see, this is not the first time. This army has been all over. We have been to Guinea, we have been to Congo, we are in Somalia. I have not, maybe you have. I have not seen a single, and we are using taxpayers' money. I have not seen a single report or audit, whether it is the Auditor General's report arising from budgetary reviews or specialized study. I mean, this is, for God's sake, this is a national army. We should have some clear report telling us, because for me, what is much more important, it's not a question of whether we are going for these expeditions or not. The question is, what is the justification? Because, one, these are wars. In war, people die. Eh? In security terms, when you hear a bullet and you're at the theater of war, you see a sound, they call it, there is that is sound and light, which one moves faster? By the time you hear the sound of a bullet, somebody has fallen. I can assure you, somebody has fallen. So people are dying. Uganda has a very young population. Young people are dying. Prof was talking about the global economic growth landscape, where it is now something of the mind. People are now using knowledge. We have seen recent wars. People are now going to fight with the drones. You've seen the war of Ukraine. They are hardly boots on the ground. But here, we are still rudimentarily transporting people in lorries. You saw the images in Juba. You saw the images in Congo. So we are losing lives. We are spending money. And then we keep claiming we are a democratic society. The principles of democracy are simple. Citizens must participate. Citizens' voice must be heard. Agency must be upheld. There must be accountability. There must be transparency. Yes, government, the executive has a right to do these things in the way it views them. But it has to find time and come back to us and explain these things to us truthfully. When are they doing that? When do they do that? And for me, that is the problem. So I think we really, really have a problem in our hand. Going back to Sudan, there's what they call, in political science, is what they call having the pulses of a situation. As I read from the media, as I hear commentaries from senior officers in Southern Sudan, as I hear contradictions, like in the situation of Odinga going, he can only see one party, he cannot see the other. The party is denying, they're saying go to Kampala. What has Kampala got to do with giving permission of what is happening in Southern Sudan? So you can clearly see that we need to go back. We need to step back and understand Sudan is a sovereign state, Congo is a sovereign state, and if we really are keen to be global...
But what is sovereign about them? When they have foreign armies controlling them.
It's the jurisdiction.
At least the parallels, the parallel lines, imagined, conceived, or perceived, are there.
No, one of these days I will be forced to give a weird solution that
Weird
that some of these countries need to be put under a trusteeship council by the UN or AU for 5 years and then settle down for political settlement.
I think
They are not viable.
That happened with
Sovereignty of
East
what?
Timor. Yeah, East Timor. East Timor was so
We need a trusteeship
yeah, so-
council to
and-
rule
and-
these countries for
and
5
these
years.
solutions are there. So really, in a nutshell, I think if Uganda is interested to be counted amongst global citizens with democratic, the democratic credentials, I think we need to change our approaches to things. And by the way, it's not that these things don't go without an impact. They do have, you know. As we're speaking now, and people don't realize, you know that, for instance, if you look at the level of international support Uganda had by 2012 compared to now, almost all our Western allies, particularly on our development budget, on our military support, they have fled. Why? Can anybody stop and ask themselves what is going on? So it seems like we are simply moving. We are not scanning our environment. Uganda is in a very precarious situation. That I can tell you.
Thank you, Doctor, for your perspective. Dogo, your closing remarks on the program.
So thank you so much. I think for me, I would like to close on the question of the alternative budget report that the leader of opposition and the opposition at large presented. It gives us an opportunity to reflect, really, because when you look at some of the proposals vis-a-vis what is being done, the disparity is so wide in terms of what is being presented by the executive, by government, and what the opposition seem to suggest. I think it should give us an opportunity to step back and reflect on most of these things. The idea to dismiss and to actually water down any effort by the opposition or any of the stakeholders in advancing the goodwill of the country, including the nationhood of what Prof likes to highlight, it goes a long way to frustrate that process. And so I think that when we look at, we are currently in the budget process, we shall be seeing the different shadow ministers on the opposition, equally presenting the shadow ministerial policy statements. And shadow ministerial policy statements are really, they are alternatives to what the government or the different ministers present on the floor of parliament. We should be able to take in interest in some of those things. What is good? A good idea should pave way for a better idea. A better idea should pave way for the best one. Thank you.
Thank you, Timothy. Professor, your closing remarks.
My closing remarks on the alternative budget is that it is irrelevant in spite of Baryomun's reaction to say it is useless, is inconsequential. No, I think it is very important to provoke even a debate like we are already having here. I wish they could also have it in Parliament, at least to think for alternative paradigms, alternative thinking, because we have continued to match time. Similarly, for the Sudan question and the Congo question, similarly, I think this sovereignty issue needs to be rethought. The whole notion of sovereignty as the Westphalian paradigm, we need to shift. I wish we could have some of these countries put under trusteeship council, either of the UN or of AU, for at least some period of time. And we move, because we are tired of this humanitarian catastrophe. You hear in Congo, more than 5 million people have died of the war and related war issues. In Sudan, there are even only just 11 million people. Before we know it, Sudan will be emptied of human beings, and you will only have, like, say, 3 million people instead of 11 million people. I think we might have to have a global paradigm that shifts away from this sovereignty of Rastafarian system.
I must appreciate you, my guests, Professor Mwambusa Ndebesa, Mr. Timothy Chimonges, and Dr. Tolit Charles Atia for your able participation on today's edition of Focus on Parliament. And many thanks indeed to our esteemed viewers for keeping us company from the start of this program up to its conclusion. Much appreciation to the production department for keeping us live on air. Our dear viewers, please engage us on our various social media platforms. We are on X, we are on Facebook. You can watch this program on our YouTube channel and also subscribe. We'll see you next time. Be blessed.